Hey guys, tonight we are heading somewhere cold. Not the pleasant sort of cold that leaves a little frost on a window and gives you an excuse to pull another blanket over your feet. This is the older kind of cold. The kind that settles over empty country, presses against wooden walls, and waits very patiently for the fire to go out. So if you enjoy these quiet journeys into the less comfortable corners of history, feel free to subscribe or leave a comment telling me where you're listening from tonight. And now dim the lights, get comfortable, pull the blankets a little higher, and let the modern world become quiet for a while. Because outside your door, it is already beginning to snow. Congratulations. You have just woken up on the American frontier in the winter of 1880, and unfortunately you are cold. Very cold. The first thing you notice is your breath. It hangs above your face in a pale cloud before disappearing into the darkness. You are lying beneath several heavy quilts, a wool blanket, and something that smells faintly of animal hide. None of them seems quite sufficient. Your nose is cold. Your ears are cold. One foot has somehow escaped from beneath the blankets during the night, and it now feels like an object belonging to somebody else. Across the cabin, however, there is still a dull orange glow. That is good news. The fire is alive, barely. You lie still for another moment, listening. The cabin makes noises in winter. Logs contract in the cold with little cracks and groans. Wind presses against the walls. Somewhere above you, snow brushes softly across the roof. The chimney gives a low, hollow murmur whenever a gust passes over it. Beside you, another person sleeps beneath the blankets. Perhaps your wife, perhaps your husband. On the other side of the room, children are packed together in a bed like spoons in a drawer, sharing warmth, because warmth is one of the few things a poor frontier household can create without spending money. Nobody has central heating, nobody has electricity, nobody has insulation manufactured in a distant factory. What you have is wood, stone, wool, mud, moss, and experience. Experience matters more than almost anything else. By 1880, families scattered across the northern plains and mountain country have learned that surviving winter is rarely about one clever invention. It is about dozens of small habits performed correctly every day for months. A badly fitted door matters. A damp stack of firewood matters. A crack between two logs matters. Going to bed without banking the fire properly matters. Winter collects small mistakes. And on the coldest nights, it presents the bill. You push the blankets aside. This is immediately regrettable. Cold air slips beneath your nightclothes and crawls across your skin. You sit up quickly, slide your feet into wool stockings, and reach for trousers hanging beside the bed. The cloth is stiff and cold. Everything is cold before the fire is properly awake. You cross the floor. The boards complain beneath your feet. Near the hearth, the temperature is better, although only slightly. Yesterday evening there had been a healthy fire here, flames rolling around thick pieces of hardwood. Now there is mostly ash, but beneath that ash are coals. You kneel. This is the little miracle upon which your morning depends. You take the iron poker and carefully disturb the grey surface. A red point appears. Then another. Then a whole buried patch of orange. The fire did not die. It slept. You place dry kindling over the coals. Thin pieces first, then slightly larger ones. You open the draft and wait for several seconds. Nothing happens. The wind moans outside. A child turns beneath the blankets. Then a tiny flame appears. It bends sideways, catches, another follows. Soon the kindling begins to crackle, and the room gains that warm orange light which frontier families know almost as intimately as daylight. Only now can the day properly begin. But keeping this fire alive is not simply a matter of throwing logs into flames. The wood beside you represents months of labor. Long before the first snow, trees had to be selected, felled, cut, split, carried, stacked, and dried. Wet wood burns badly. Green wood smokes. Poorly seasoned wood may hiss in the fireplace, while giving less heat than the family desperately needs. So the woodpile is a kind of winter savings account, although nobody in the cabin would describe it that way. Every log is stored summer sunlight. Every armful carried through the door is another little portion of July being sacrificed to January. You add a heavier split log, Flames begin licking around its edge. Behind you comes the sound of blankets moving. The family is waking. There is no great enthusiasm about this. Mourning on a frozen frontier is not an event that invites celebration. A child emerges with tangled hair and wraps a blanket around narrow shoulders. Another refuses to leave the bed until someone promises breakfast. An adult reaches for yesterday's wool clothing and begins dressing close to the hearth. Nobody wastes the heat. That is another rule. You cook where you warm yourself. You dry clothing where you cook. You hang damp mittens near the same fire that heats water. A single flame may warm the room. Cook porridge, dry boots, heat stones for bedding, and provide enough light to mend a torn sleeve. Efficiency here is not fashionable. It is survival. Outside, the temperature may be far below freezing. In some frontier winters, especially across the northern plains, cold arrives with astonishing violence. A clear afternoon can become a dangerous evening once the wind rises. Snow crosses open land with nothing to stop it for miles. The cabin is therefore more than a house. It is a small wooden island surrounded by weather, and its walls are less solid than you might hope. Look closely at them. They are thick logs laid horizontally, one above another. Between them is chinking, a mixture that might include clay, mud, grass, straw, or whatever local materials are available. It does not look elegant. Elegance is not currently one of your concerns. The important thing is that the wind stays outside. A crack no wider than your finger can produce a stream of icy air strong enough to make one corner of the cabin miserable all night. So throughout autumn, the family has inspected the walls, gaps are filled. Loose chinking is replaced. The door is checked. Cloth, hide, or other material may be placed where drafts appear. Every repair is an argument with winter. Winter usually wins eventually. The goal is simply to make the argument last until spring. Breakfast begins to smell warm. Perhaps there's cornmeal porridge. Perhaps bread. Perhaps salted pork if the household is fortunate. A pot hangs near the fire, and steam rises slowly from it. That steam changes the room. So does the smell. Suddenly the cabin feels less like a box protecting human bodies from freezing and more like a home. This distinction is important. People on the frontier do not spend winter merely surviving dramatic emergencies. Most days contain no heroic moment. They contain chores, endless chores. Someone brings in wood, someone breaks ice for water, someone checks livestock. Someone repairs clothing, someone shakes snow from boots, someone cooks, someone sweeps ash. Someone looks at the sky and wonders whether the weather is becoming worse. Survival is repetitive. That is perhaps the least romantic truth about frontier life. The people most likely to make it through a severe winter are not necessarily the strongest or bravest. Often, they are simply the ones who prepared. The ones who stacked more wood than seemed necessary. The ones who dried it carefully. The ones who noticed the crack near the door before the blizzard arrived. The ones who kept spare kindling dry. The ones who understood that a fire must be prepared for the night before everyone becomes sleepy. But by late afternoon, these small decisions begin to matter. The daylight fades early. The world outside turns blue, then grey. Wind moves loose snow across the ground. Inside, supper is eaten near the fire. And now the family begins one of the most important rituals of the winter day, preparing for darkness. More wood is carried indoors. Not enough for the week, not enough for tomorrow, enough for tonight. Large pieces are selected for the long burn, smaller pieces remain ready for quick flames. The hearth is cleared where necessary, but the coal bed is protected. Beds are prepared, blankets are arranged. If stones or bricks are used for warming, they are placed carefully near the hearth, where they can absorb heat before being wrapped and carried to sleeping places. The children move closer to the fire. Outside, there is almost no light now, only snow, only wind, only miles of frozen country stretching beyond the cabin walls. And here, perhaps, is the strange thing. You're not thinking about conquering the wilderness. You're not thinking about becoming part of history. You're thinking about whether there is enough wood beside the hearth. You're thinking about the draft near the window. You're thinking about keeping the children warm. History will later remember railroads, settlements, wars, cattle drives, and famous names. But tonight, none of those things matter. Tonight history is a family gathered around a fire. And as darkness settles completely over the frontier, you begin preparing that fire for the long hours ahead. Because lighting a fire is easy. The difficult part is making sure it is still alive when you wake. By the time the last grey light disappears beyond the frozen horizon, the cabin has changed. Daytime is forgiving. Even in winter, there are chores to occupy the hands and sunlight to remind you that the world still exists beyond the walls. But night on the frontier feels different. The darkness is wider, the cold seems closer. And every small sound from the hearth becomes important. You kneel beside the fire again. This time, you are not trying to make it burn brightly, you are trying to make it burn slowly. There is a difference. A roaring fire is comforting while everyone is awake, but it consumes wood quickly. Send too much heat up the chimney now, and you may find yourself staring into cold ashes several hours before sunrise. So you begin preparing the overnight fire. First, you make certain there is a deep bed of glowing coals. The smaller pieces of wood have already burned down, leaving behind a red foundation beneath the flames. Onto this you place larger pieces of seasoned hardwood. Heavy pieces, slow-burning pieces, the sort of wood that does not immediately surrender itself to flame. You arrange them carefully, leaving enough space for air to move, but not so much that the fire races through them. Then you adjust the airflow. The flames become smaller. The cabin grows quieter. This is what you want. A frontier family does not need a spectacular fire at midnight. It needs a patient one. There is an old intimacy between people and fire that modern life makes easy to forget. Here you know the personality of your hearth. You know how it behaves when the wind comes from the north. You know which logs burn too quickly. You know how far to close the damper without filling the room with smoke. You know the difference between the harmless crack of settling wood and the sudden shower of sparks that sends everyone reaching for a bucket. These things are learned slowly, sometimes painfully. And the knowledge is passed through families not as formal science, but as habit. Watch your father, watch your mother, watch your neighbor. Remember what happened last winter. Do not make the same mistake twice. The children are already being put to bed. Their sleeping place has been prepared with almost as much care as the fire. A thick mattress filled with straw or feathers keeps their bodies away from the cold boards below. Over that come blankets and quilts. Wool is precious because it continues to insulate even when slightly damp, and in a household with access to animal hides, furs may provide another heavy layer. But there is another source of warmth waiting near the hearth. Stones during the evening. Several smooth stones have been warming beside the fire. They are not glowing. They should never be hot enough to scorch cloth or skin. Instead, they have absorbed heat gradually. An adult tests one carefully, wraps it in thick fabric, and carries it toward the bed. The bundle disappears beneath the blankets near the children's feet. Another follows. Soon the cold bedding begins to warm. It is a simple idea, almost embarrassingly simple. Yet on a freezing night, a warm stone can feel like a luxury fit for a king. The stone does not create heat. It merely stores what the fire has already given. Then it releases that warmth slowly into the bed. The same principle is at work in the stones surrounding the fireplace. They absorb heat while the fire is strong and continue giving some of it back after the flames weaken. Nothing is wasted if it can be helped. Not heat, not food, not cloth, not daylight, certainly not firewood. The children climb beneath the blankets. They sleep close together. This too is useful. Human bodies are small furnaces. A person constantly produces heat, and several people sleeping close together can create a surprisingly warm pocket beneath heavy bedding. Privacy is a luxury that becomes considerably less interesting when frost is forming on the inside of the window, so families crowd together. Brothers beside sisters, small children near adults. Sometimes several people share a bed because there is simply nowhere else to sleep. Sometimes they do it because the night is dangerously cold. You might hear complaints, a knee in someone's back, a blanket stolen in the darkness, a child insisting that another child's feet are too cold. These are ordinary annoyances, but beneath the humor is a serious truth. Shared warmth saves heat, and heat saves lives. Before everyone settles down, You inspect the room once more. The door is secured. The window coverings are in place. Heavy cloth, shutters, blankets, or hides help reduce the cold radiating from the glass or openings. You run your hand near the edge of the door. There, a draft. A thin blade of cold air touches your fingers. You push folded cloth against the gap. Better. It seems almost ridiculous that something so small should matter, but winter does not always enter a cabin dramatically. Sometimes it arrives through a crack. A little cold air enters continuously. Warm air escapes. The wall near the opening cools. A sleeping person nearby becomes uncomfortable, then dangerously chilled. Hour after hour, tiny losses become large ones. So you check the cracks. Again and again. Outside, snow begins to collect against the cabin. Oddly enough, this can sometimes help. Snow is dangerous when it traps travelers or buries paths, but settled snow also contains enormous amounts of trapped air. Against the lower walls of a cabin, it may provide an additional barrier against wind. The wilderness has a habit of making the same thing both enemy and ally. Snow can kill you. Snow can insulate you. Fire can save you. Fire can burn down your house. Water keeps you alive. Frozen water can become nearly useless. Survival depends on understanding these contradictions. The room is now ready for sleep. Almost. Someone places tomorrow morning's kindling where it will remain dry. This is essential. You do not want to wake in darkness, discover that the fire has nearly died, and then begin searching for usable tinder with numb fingers. Preparation for morning begins before bed: dry splinters, small sticks, perhaps bark. Everything is kept near enough to reach quickly, but far enough from sparks to avoid disaster. Fire safety is never far from the mind. A wooden cabin filled with dried bedding, clothing, timber, and stored goods can burn frighteningly fast. And a house fire in deep winter presents a particularly cruel choice. Escape the flames and you may still face deadly cold outside. So the hearth must be watched. Sparks contained, ash handled carefully. The chimney kept as clean as circumstances allow. Children learn early that the fire is not a toy. They do not need a lecture on this. They see what fire can do. Eventually, the cabin settles. Conversation fades. The final chores are completed. One by one, people disappear beneath quilts. You lie down as well. The bedding is cold for a moment, then your body begins warming the little space around you. You pull the blankets close beneath your chin. Across the room, the fire moves softly. Orange light flickers against the log walls. You can smell wood, smoke, wool, ash. Perhaps the faint remains of supper. Beyond the wall comes the low whistle of wind. You close your eyes. For a while, sleep comes easily. Then sometime in the deepest part of the night you wake. There is no clock glowing beside your bed. You do not know the hour, but something has changed. The room is colder. Your face tells you first. The air against your cheeks has become sharp. The fire is no longer throwing light across the ceiling. Only a faint red glow remains. You listen to the family breathing. Everyone seems asleep. For several moments you consider staying beneath the blankets. This is perhaps the greatest temptation of the frontier winter. The bed is warm. The floor is cold. The fire is distant. Surely it can wait. But you know better. You throw back the covers. Cold immediately surrounds you. Your feet find the floor. You cross the dark room and crouch beside the hearth. The large logs have collapsed inward. Most are black. One still carries a deep orange line along its underside. You take the poker. A few sparks rise. There are coals beneath the ash. Good, very good. You place another piece of wood onto them, then another. You open the airflow slightly. The coals brighten. A flame appears. You remain there for a few minutes, watching. It would be foolish to return to bed before you know the new wood has caught. So you wait. Your eyes grow heavy, your shoulders ache. The wind continues outside, then the flame strengthens. The new log begins to burn. Only now do you return to the blankets. This interruption may happen every night during the worst weather. There is nothing heroic about it. No one will write songs about the sleepy parent who climbed from bed to add wood to a frontier fireplace. Yet these quiet acts are the true machinery of survival. Someone wakes, someone checks, someone notices, someone prepares. Again and again. Night after night, winter after winter. And perhaps that is the most important thing to understand about the families who survive these places. They are not defeating the cold. They cannot defeat it. The cold is larger than they are. The storm does not care how brave they feel. Instead, they make themselves difficult to kill through preparation, repetition, and attention. By dawn, pale light begins leaking around the window covering. You wake once more. The fire is low but alive. The stones beneath the blankets are cold now. The room itself is cold enough that leaving bed will once again be unpleasant. But nobody froze. Nobody had to stumble outside in darkness, searching for wood. Nobody woke to a dead hearth and a cabin filled with deadly cold. The night has passed. For now, that is enough. You rise and walk toward the fire. Beneath a blanket of grey ash. Yesterday's heat is still waiting. You uncover the coals. They glow red. And from that tiny surviving ember, the entire household begins again. But the fire is only half the story. Because keeping warmth inside a frontier cabin depends just as much on what stands between your family and the winter beyond those walls. Let us leave the glowing hearth behind and move closer to those rough timbers where moss, mud, bark, snow, and even scraps of animal hair quietly perform another kind of winter work. Let us leave the glowing hearth behind and move closer to those rough timbers where moss, mud, bark, snow, and even scraps of animal hair quietly perform another kind of winter work. By morning, the cabin is brighter. Not warmer, exactly. Brightness and warmth are two very different things on the frontier. Pale winter sunlight slips through the window and reveals little silver lines of frost along the edges. The fire has been revived. Breakfast is underway, and someone has opened the door just long enough to step outside. A gust follows them in. It moves across the floor like invisible water. Everyone notices the door closes quickly. This is the problem frontier families face every winter day. Making heat is difficult, keeping it is harder. You can burn the finest oak in the country, feed a fireplace from sunset until sunrise, and still spend the night shivering if the warmth escapes through your roof. Walls, floor, windows, and door. A cabin is not naturally warm. It has to be persuaded. And so, long before winter arrives, your family spends days examining the structure almost as carefully as you might inspect a coat before walking into a storm. The walls come first. From a distance, the cabin looks solid enough. Heavy logs are stacked one above another. Their surfaces are rough from the axe. Some still show knots and scars from branches that once reached toward the forest canopy. But trees are not perfectly straight. Stack two logs together and gaps remain. Some are narrow, others are wide enough to push several fingers through. Without filling those spaces, the cabin is little more than a very sturdy wooden cage. So the gaps must be sealed. Depending on where you live and what is available, the mixture might contain clay, mud, grass, straw, moss, or combinations of several materials. The work is slow. You press material between the logs. Smooth it, wait, return later. Look for cracks, repair them, then do it again. There is no glamorous moment when the cabin suddenly becomes winterproof. Instead, it becomes slightly less drafty, one handful of mud at a time. Imagine spending an autumn afternoon doing this. The air smells of damp earth and wood smoke. Your fingers are covered in clay. A child carries moss in a basket. Someone on the other side of the cabin complains that you missed a gap. You insist that you did not. They point to it. You did, so you fill that one too. This is how insulation looks before anyone uses the word as casually as we do today. There are no neat rolls of manufactured material. No shining sheets hidden behind finished walls. You use what the land gives you. Moss is especially useful. When properly dried, its tangled structure traps small pockets of air. And trapped air is valuable because still air slows the movement of heat. A frontier family may not describe the process in scientific language, but they understand the result perfectly well. Put moss in the gap. The wall feels less cold. The room stays warmer. Therefore, collect more moss. Simple observations become household knowledge. In some regions, families use straw, elsewhere, dried grass. Animal hair can be mixed into chinking material, helping hold it together. Bark may appear in parts of the structure. Sod can become both building material and insulation. Nothing needs to look beautiful, it needs to work. And almost everything useful has already lived another life. Straw has grown in a field. Hair has belonged to an animal. Mud has been walked across. Moss has spent years quietly covering stones in a wet patch of forest. Now all of it becomes part of the wall, standing between a sleeping child and a winter wind. The roof deserves equal attention, perhaps more. Warm air rises. If the roof allows that warmth to escape freely, you can continue feeding the fire and accomplish little more than heating the night sky. So frontier roofs can become surprisingly thick. Construction varies greatly by place, climate, available timber, and the background of the people building the home. There is no single frontier cabin that is worth remembering. A family in the wooded country does not build exactly as a family on open prairie might. Settlers bring traditions from different parts of Europe and older American settlements. They borrow ideas from neighbors, they adapt to local materials. What works in one place may be foolish in another, but the goal remains the same. Keep water out, keep wind out, keep heat in, layers help. Wood may form the main roof structure. Bark, earth, sod, or other materials may add protection depending on the cabin type. A thick roof has disadvantages. It is heavy. It requires maintenance. Water is persistent. Give it one weak place and it will find its way inside. Then you have dampness. And dampness in winter is an enemy almost as unpleasant as cold. Wet insulation loses effectiveness. Wet clothing chills the body. Wet timber rots. Wet bedding can make a miserable night genuinely dangerous. So when autumn rain reveals a leak, you do not simply place a bucket beneath it and forget the matter. You repair the roof. Winter is coming. There is always that thought, winter is coming, not as a dramatic prophecy, as a deadline. The floor presents another problem. Cold does not politely remain outside the walls. It rises from the ground beneath you. If your cabin has a wooden floor, every gap between boards can admit cold air. If the floor is poorly protected from the earth below, it becomes a broad, cold surface beneath the entire household. So people improvise. Rugs, hides, straw, and other materials may soften the cold. Furniture is positioned with drafts in mind. Beds are raised. Sleeping directly against a frozen floor is avoided whenever possible. And then there is the door, the troublesome door. It must open. That is its entire purpose. Unfortunately, opening it allows all your carefully trapped warm air to escape while inviting winter inside. Every trip becomes a small negotiation. Someone needs wood, open, close. Someone needs water, open, close. Someone has to tend an animal, open, close. A child stands in the doorway staring at the snow. Someone immediately tells the child to close the door. Some human experiences apparently survive unchanged through the centuries. Around the edges of the door, material may be used to reduce drafts. Leather, cloth, fur. Anything flexible enough to cover a gap. You learn to detect leaks with your hand. Move your fingers slowly along the frame, and you can feel the cold air entering. Sometimes you can hear it, a faint whistle. The cabin itself telling you where it is weak. Windows are even more difficult. Glass is expensive in many frontier settings, particularly farther from established supply routes. Some cabins have very small windows because every opening in a wall sacrifices protection. Where glass is available, it still provides little insulation compared with the thick surrounding timber. At night, the window becomes a cold patch in the room, so you cover it. A shutter can help, so can thick fabric. A blanket hung over the opening creates another layer of trapped air. The room becomes darker, but darkness is hardly a problem when everyone is going to sleep. Warmth matters more. And then there is snow. During a long storm, it gathers against the cabin walls. At first, you may worry about it. Snow blocks paths, it piles around doors, it hides objects, it makes every outdoor chore harder. But snow has another quality. It traps air. A bank of snow pressed around the lower outside walls can reduce the direct force of bitter wind against them. This does not mean frontier families intentionally bury every cabin in snow. Too much snow brings its own dangers and problems, but the insulating quality of settled snow is something people living in cold climates have understood for generations. Nature, once again, refuses to be simple. The thing freezing the landscape can also help protect you from the freezing landscape. By afternoon, you are outside inspecting the wall. The sun is low even though the day does not feel old. You find a damaged patch of chinking. Perhaps moisture opened it. Perhaps the logs shifted slightly. Perhaps it was simply missed before. You kneel and repair it. Your fingers become numb. You breathe onto them. Work again. The gap is not large. You could ignore it. That thought probably enters your mind. After all, the fire is burning. There is wood stacked nearby. The cabin survived last night. Surely one small opening does not matter. But you fill it anyway. This habit, the refusal to ignore small weaknesses, is one of the quiet foundations of winter survival. The family that waits for a blizzard before repairing the cabin has waited too long. The family that waits until the woodpile is low before searching for fuel has waited too long. The family that waits until fingers are numb before finding dry mittens has waited too long. Winter rewards anticipation. It punishes delay. When you return inside, the difference is immediate. Not dramatic, but immediate. The air is still cool, your cheeks are still red, yet the wind has stopped touching you. There is a great comfort in that. The fire crackles. A pot simmers. Damp outer clothing hangs where it can dry. Children occupy the warmest part of the room without admitting that they have deliberately done so. The cabin is imperfect. The walls are rough. The roof may leak eventually. The floor is cold. The window is small. The door fits badly, and yet the structure works because dozens of little barriers cooperate. A piece of moss, a smear of clay, a strip of leather, a wool blanket, a bank of snow. None would save a family alone. Together, they create something extraordinary, a pocket of survivable air. That is what your home really is tonight, not a fortress against winter. Not a place where cold has been defeated. Just a small pocket where human beings have persuaded warmth to remain a little longer. And as evening approaches again, you begin to understand that the most valuable warmth in this cabin may not be stored in the walls at all. Because once the lamps are lowered and everyone crawls beneath the quilts, the family itself becomes part of the heating system. By the time darkness returns, the walls have done all they can. The cracks are filled. The door is closed tightly. The window is covered. Snow rests against the lower timbers outside, and the fire sends a steady orange glow across the room. Yet the cabin is not warm in the way a modern house is warm. There are no evenly heated rooms, no quiet furnace hidden somewhere beyond sight. Warmth has a geography here. Near the hearth, your face may become almost too hot. Several steps away, the air is comfortable. Near the door, your feet begin to feel cold. And beside the window, winter seems to be waiting just behind the blanket. So when bedtime approaches, the family does not simply go to sleep. You prepare for sleep. There is a difference. The first task is clothing. On a bitter night, taking off every layer before climbing into bed would make little sense. Clean, dry garments may remain on the body, especially when the room is cold enough to make dressing again before dawn deeply unpleasant. Wool is your quiet companion. It scratches. It smells peculiar when damp. It can feel heavy, but wool has one great advantage in a frontier winter. It keeps helping even when conditions are imperfect. A linen layer against the skin may be followed by woolen clothing, and additional garments can be added according to the cold. The principle is simple. One thick layer can keep you warm. Several layers can do something better. They trap small pockets of air between them. Once your body warms that air, the clothing slows its escape. Again, nobody in the cabin needs a scientific explanation. You know what works because you have been cold before. Your hands have taught you. Your feet have taught you. Perhaps one miserable winter night years earlier taught you better than any book ever could. And clothing itself represents labor. A wool blanket does not simply appear. There are sheep to tend, wool to shear, fibers to clean. thread to spin, cloth to weave, garments to cut and sew. A pair of warm stockings may look humble beside the grand objects preserved in museums, but to the person wearing them through a frontier winter, they are far more useful than a polished sword or a silver cup. Your great-grandfather might have understood wealth differently on a night like this. A dry blanket, a full woodpile, a sound roof, a healthy animal, food in the cupboard, these are riches when snow covers the road. Across the cabin, the children are preparing their bed. Preparing may be too generous a word. Mostly they are arguing. One claims the warm side. Another insists there is no warm side. Someone has cold feet. Someone else strongly objects to those cold feet being placed against them. An adult eventually settles the matter with the ancient authority of a tired parent. Everyone moves closer together. This is not merely a consequence of limited space. Shared body heat can make sleeping much more comfortable. The smallest children are particularly vulnerable to cold, so keeping them surrounded by warm bedding and warmer bodies makes practical sense. A baby may sleep close to a mother. Young children may share a bed. Siblings may be packed beneath the same quilts. The arrangement would feel crowded to many modern sleepers. On the frontier, empty space beneath a blanket is simply more air your body must warm. So you become less particular. You forgive elbows, you tolerate knees. You discover that dignity becomes remarkably flexible when the alternative is shivering alone. The bed itself is another layer of defense. A simple wooden frame lifts the sleeper away from the floor. This matters because the floor can become brutally cold. Across the frame may lie ropes or supports holding a mattress stuffed with straw, corn husks, feathers, or other available material. A wealthy household and a poor household will not sleep alike. Nor will a family near an established town sleep exactly as an isolated homesteading family does. But almost everyone understands the value of putting insulating material beneath the body as well as above it. Heat escapes downward too. So the mattress matters. Then come blankets, quilts, perhaps hides. Layers accumulate until the bed begins to resemble a small shelter inside the larger shelter of the cabin. In some homes, curtains around a bed can reduce drafts and trap warmer air near the sleepers. It is a room within a room, a tiny climate created by cloth and human breath. Before you climb inside, however, something warm arrives, a wrapped stone. It has been sitting near the hearth for much of the evening. You handle it carefully. The cloth around it is warm against your palms. You slide it beneath the covers near the foot of the bed. Immediately, the cold sheets begin to change. There is something deeply satisfying about this. A stone is one of the least comforting objects imaginable. Hard, heavy, indifferent. Yet, after an evening near the fire, it becomes a little reservoir of summer-like warmth. Bricks can serve a similar purpose. In later households, various warming pans and heated objects perform the same basic task. But whatever the object, caution matters. Too much heat can scorch bedding. A poorly handled ember can cause catastrophe. The goal is warmth, not flame. So heated objects are wrapped and checked. Children are taught not to play with them. The bed warms gradually. Meanwhile, supper has provided another form of heat. Your own body is producing it. A warm meal before sleep offers comfort and energy. In winter, calories are not an abstract concern. Maintaining body temperature requires fuel, especially when people spend long periods working outside. This helps explain why rich, heavy foods are so welcome in cold climates. Fat, bread, porridge, meat when available, stew, beans, hot broth. The exact meal depends on region, season, household wealth, harvest, and what remains in storage. But warm food does more than fill the stomach, it changes the mood of the cabin. Imagine returning from an outdoor chore with aching fingers. Snow clings to your boots, your cheeks sting, your nose has been running for longer than you would care to admit. Then someone hands you a bowl, steam rises into your face. For a moment you hold it before eating. Your palms absorb the warmth. You smell broth, grain, onion, perhaps meat. The experience is almost medicinal. Not because the food contains some secret frontier cure, because you are cold, tired, hungry, and home. This emotional side of warmth matters. Winter isolation can be difficult. Storms may cut families off from neighbors. Travel becomes dangerous. Days grow short. Work continues. Illness does not politely wait for spring. Neither does childbirth. Neither do injuries. A cabin can become the entire world for long stretches of bad weather. And within that world, the hearth becomes its center. People tell stories beside it. Clothing is repaired beside it. Tools are mended. Children learn letters if books are available. Someone may read from a Bible, newspaper, almanac, or treasured volume. Someone else may simply stare into the flames. There is a reason fire appears so often in memories of older domestic life. It is not only heat, it is light, cooking, safety, work, conversation, and on the loneliest nights, companionship outside. The wind continues. You can hear it pressing against the wall you repaired earlier. The patch holds. No cold stream of air reaches your hand. A small victory. Then someone opens the door. Instantly the room protests. Cold air rushes across the floor. The person entering carries an armful of wood, shoulders dusted with snow. The door shuts behind them. They stamp their boots. Snow falls onto the boards and begins melting. Nobody complains about the interruption. The wood is necessary. In fact, the sight of it is reassuring. Every dry piece brought indoors is another measure of security. The logs are stacked where they can be reached during the night. Not too close to sparks, not somewhere they will become wet. Everything has its place. The fire is fed. The children disappear beneath the quilts. One by one, the sounds of the household soften. Soon you are beneath your own blankets. The heated stone rests near your feet. Another body lies beside you. The air around your face is cold, but beneath the covers a pocket of warmth begins forming. You notice something that would have seemed strange only a few days ago. You are comfortable not because the cabin is warm. It isn't. Not because winter has weakened. It hasn't. You are comfortable because warmth has been concentrated exactly where it is needed, around bodies, inside clothing, beneath quilts, within mattresses, beside the hearth. The family does not waste energy trying to make every corner of the cabin pleasant. That would consume too much fuel. Instead, they create small, warm places inside a cold world. And this may be one of the most important frontier lessons of all. Survival is often about reducing the size of the problem. You cannot warm the prairie, so you warm the cabin. You cannot perfectly warm the cabin. So you warm the bed, you cannot stop the wind, so you close the crack where it enters. You cannot make winter disappear, so you keep one another warm until morning. Hours pass. The heated stone slowly loses its warmth. The fire burns lower. Bodies remain beneath thick blankets. And sometime before dawn, you wake to discover that the child who complained about sharing a bed has moved closer to the others in sleep. No one mentions this in the morning. There are chores waiting, there is ice to break, wood to carry, food to prepare, another fire to build, another sunset already approaching. And as the household rises, you begin to notice something less comforting. The woodpile outside is smaller than it was yesterday, much smaller than it was at the beginning of winter. The realization lingers as you look toward the hearth. Because the longest nights are still ahead, we drift onward now, deeper into the frozen season, to the hours when a family must decide exactly how much wood can be burned tonight without stealing warmth from tomorrow. We drift onward now, deeper into the frozen season, to the hours when a family must decide exactly how much wood can be burned tonight without stealing warmth from tomorrow. The woodpile has been shrinking for weeks. At first, nobody worried. In early winter, it stood against the side of the cabin in neat rows, stacked high beneath a rough covering that kept most of the snow away. Looking at it then, you might have felt almost wealthy. There seemed to be enough wood for anything. Enough for breakfast fires, enough for cooking, enough for bitter evenings. Enough for those long overnight burns when the wind screamed across the open land. But winter has an appetite, and it eats slowly. One log tonight, another before dawn, several more tomorrow. An armful disappears during supper. Another is carried inside after midnight. Day follows day, and the great wall of wood becomes a smaller wall. Then a stack, then several lonely rows. By the middle of the season, you begin looking at every piece differently. A log is no longer simply a log, it is time. That thick piece of hardwood might mean several hours of steady heat. Those smaller splits might revive a dying fire quickly. That bundle of dry kindling might save precious minutes on a morning when the coals have nearly disappeared. You start calculating without writing anything down. How cold is tonight likely to become? How strong is the wind? How much food must be cooked tomorrow? How many days until the weather improves? And, most importantly, how much wood remains? There is no reliable forecast arriving from a distant city. You have the sky, the wind, the behavior of animals. Perhaps an almanac. Perhaps the experience of an older neighbor who looks toward the horizon, rubs his beard, and announces that the weather is turning. Sometimes he is right. Sometimes he is simply an older man with a beard. Either way you listen. This evening the signs are unpleasant. The sky has gone clear. That may sound encouraging. It is not. Clouds can sometimes hold warmth closer to the earth. A clear winter night can allow temperatures to fall sharply after sunset. The wind has also changed. It comes across the land with a dry, cutting force. Snow squeaks beneath your boots when you step outside. The sound itself seems cold. You stand beside the woodpile and look at what remains. You choose carefully a few heavy pieces, several medium splits, kindling. You carry them indoors. Then you return for another load. Your arms ache. The cold catches the moisture in your nose. Your fingers begin losing feeling even inside mittens. By the time you close the door behind you, the cabin feels almost luxurious. Not hot, never hot, but protected. The fire has been burning since afternoon, and a deep bed of coals has formed. This is important tonight. You are going to bank the fire. Banking a fire is less dramatic than building one. There is no great tower of flames, no shower of sparks intended to impress anyone. Instead, the goal is restraint. You want combustion to continue slowly for as long as possible. A fire that consumes everything before midnight is almost as useless as a fire that never starts. So you wait until the hearth contains a healthy coal bed. Then the larger fuel is arranged for a slow burn. Airflow is reduced carefully, not stopped. A fire still needs oxygen. Reduce it too far and the flames may die, or the fire may burn poorly, producing dangerous smoke. Leave too much air and the wood burns quickly. The household learns the balance through repetition. Every fireplace is slightly different. Every stove behaves differently. Every chimney draws according to its construction and the weather outside. You become familiar with yours in the way a sailor becomes familiar with a boat. You know its sounds. You know its weaknesses. You know when smoke curling strangely near the hearth means something is wrong. Tonight, the fire settles exactly as you hope. The flames shorten, the heavy wood begins to char. Beneath it, the coal bed glows like a buried sunset. Now comes another old technique. Ash can help protect coals and slow their loss. A carefully managed layer over parts of the fire reduces the speed at which the coals consume themselves. By morning, if everything goes well, there will still be enough living heat beneath that grey surface to restart the fire quickly. This matters because starting from coals is much easier than starting from nothing. Matches, where available, are valuable. Earlier fire starting methods require preparation and skill. Dry tinder must remain dry, hands must function. And on a bitter morning, when the cabin is already losing heat, you do not want to spend a long time persuading a reluctant spark to become flame. A surviving coal is therefore a gift from yesterday to tomorrow. You finish arranging the hearth and sit back. The fire looks almost disappointingly modest. A child asks why you do not put another log on. Because we will need it tomorrow. The answer is simple. The child looks toward the wood stacked beside the wall. Perhaps this is the first winter in which the child is old enough to understand what a limited woodpile means. Children on the frontier learn such arithmetic early. Not numbers written neatly on paper. The arithmetic of stores. How much flour remains, how many candles, how much salt, how much dried meat, how much feed for the animals, how much firewood. The household is always measuring itself against the remaining winter. And winter does not announce exactly when it will end. Supper is finished. The cooking fire has done several jobs at once, heating the room while warming the meal. Water has been heated. A damp garment has been hung nearby to dry. The heated stones for the beds have absorbed warmth once again. Everything circles the hearth. You notice how carefully people position themselves around it. The youngest children sit closest. An older person, if one lives with a family, may also receive a warm place. Healthy adults tolerate the colder edges of the room, not because they enjoy them, because they can. Warmth is distributed according to need. That becomes even more important when fuel is scarce. You do not heat empty space. You do not keep a roaring fire merely because bright flames are pleasant to watch. You wear more clothing. You use blankets while awake. You gather in one part of the cabin. Rooms or corners that do not need to be warm are allowed to remain cold. Life contracts toward the hearth. There is a quiet psychological effect to this. The family spends more time together, very close together, perhaps too close together. One person is mending a harness. Another is sewing. A child is practicing letters. Someone is trying to sleep. Someone is humming. Someone would very much like the humming to stop. Outside, there may be miles of empty country. Inside, personal space has become a theoretical idea. Still, there is comfort in the crowd. Every body adds a little heat. Every occupied chair near the hearth makes the small circle feel more secure. The wind strengthens. You hear it pushing against the cabin. A faint whistle comes from somewhere near the roof. You look upward. The sound stops, then begins again. Tomorrow, if weather permits, you will inspect it. Tonight, opening the cabin unnecessarily would waste heat. So you make a mental note. That is another frontier habit. Notice now. Repair when possible, do not forget. The hours pass. Eventually the children are sent to bed. The warmed stones disappear beneath blankets. Boots are positioned where they can dry without becoming dangerously close to the fire. Tomorrow's kindling is checked. Then you inspect the wood beside the hearth. There is enough. Probably. That word follows frontier families through winter. Probably enough food, probably enough wood, probably enough hay, probably enough strength. Certainty is expensive. Most people live on judgment. Before lying down, you step outside one final time. The cold strikes immediately. Above you, the sky is enormous. Stars appear painfully bright. The snow reflects their faint light, giving the landscape an eerie pale surface. No city glows on the horizon. No distant road hums. There is only wind moving across frozen ground. You turn toward the cabin. Smoke rises from the chimney and disappears into darkness. Warm light escapes through one tiny gap around the covered window. Seen from outside, the house looks impossibly small. A wooden box, a few people, a pile of fuel, and around it an entire continent of cold. For a moment, you understand just how fragile the arrangement is. Then you go inside. You close the door. The warmth surrounds you again. Hours later, you wake. The fire has burned low. You rise automatically. No discussion, no hesitation. Your feet touch the cold floor, and you walk to the hearth. The large log is still there, though smaller now. You move the ash carefully. Red appears beneath grey. The fire lives. You add one medium piece. Only one. You watch until it catches. Then you return to bed. The choice seems insignificant, but this is how the woodpile survives winter. One decision at a time, one log not burned unnecessarily, one fire banked correctly, one door closed quickly. One family accepting a cooler room tonight so that there will still be warmth tomorrow. And when morning finally comes, you step outside to collect another armful. The woodpile looks smaller again. For the first time, you count what remains with genuine concern. Because beyond the horizon, another storm is gathering. And if it lasts longer than expected, careful burning may no longer be enough. Soon, the question will not be how to make the wood last. It will be what you are willing to burn when the wood is almost gone. Morning arrives beneath a sky the color of old iron. There is no sunrise worth watching. The eastern horizon simply changes from black to grey, and the snow begins to appear again beyond the window as a flat, pale emptiness. You stand beside the woodpile. For several moments you do nothing. You simply look. Yesterday, the stack seemed worrying. This morning it seems dangerous. There is still wood that matters. But there is not enough wood to make you comfortable about the storm gathering beyond the horizon. You count the larger pieces, then you count them again, as though another log might appear if you are patient. It does not. The wind pushes loose snow around your boots. You pull your coat tighter and return to the cabin. Inside, the family can read the answer on your face. Nobody needs to ask. The fire is kept modest that morning. Breakfast cooks over it, but once the meal is finished, you allow the flames to settle lower. Everyone wears another layer. Blankets are brought from the beds and wrapped around shoulders. The children are told to remain away from the door. The warmest part of the cabin becomes the center of family life, and then the snow begins. At first, it is almost peaceful. Small flakes drift past the window. Within an hour, they are moving sideways. By midday, the world beyond the cabin has disappeared. There is no horizon, no distant tree line, no trail, only white. The storm makes a strange sound around the structure. Not a single howl, but a collection of noises. Wind moans along the roof. Snow scratches against the walls. The chimney occasionally gives a low roar. Timbers creak. Something outside bangs once. Then again, you listen. Perhaps a loose shutter. Perhaps a tool you forgot to secure. Normally you would investigate. Today, you remain indoors. Getting lost only a short distance from a cabin during a severe snowstorm is entirely possible. When wind-driven snow erases familiar landmarks, a person can become confused astonishingly quickly. A barn that seemed close in summer can feel impossibly distant in a whiteout. So outdoor trips are planned carefully. If livestock must be checked, you do it while visibility allows. If wood must be collected, you know exactly where you're going. You do not wander. The frontier has no patience for unnecessary confidence. By afternoon, another armful of wood disappears. You look at the remaining stack beside the hearth, then toward the door. The storm is strengthening. This is the moment when the household begins making uncomfortable choices. The first choice is simple. Burn less. The cabin becomes colder. Not dangerously cold yet, just uncomfortable. Everyone moves closer together. You stop trying to warm the entire interior. Instead, the family occupies a smaller area around the hearth. Furniture may be shifted. Blankets can be hung to reduce drafts or divide space. The principle is straightforward. A smaller pocket of air requires less heat than a large one, so the household shrinks. Life becomes a circle around orange coals. The second choice is food. Cooking consumes fuel. A complicated meal that requires hours over the fire is suddenly foolish. You choose food that can be heated quickly, perhaps leftovers, perhaps porridge. Perhaps something that can simmer while the same fire warms the room. Nothing is cooked merely for pleasure. Every flame must perform more than one task. The third choice is sleep. Nobody sleeps far from the fire tonight. Beds or bedding may be moved if necessary. Children are kept together. Adults take the colder positions. The best blankets go where they are needed most, and all the while the woodpile continues shrinking. You begin thinking about what else burns. This is not yet desperation. It is planning. There is scrap wood, broken furniture, old boxes, a damaged stool that nobody has repaired, perhaps pieces left from construction. All of these contain stored heat. Under ordinary circumstances, burning useful objects would be wasteful. But objects exist to serve people. People do not exist to preserve objects. If the choice becomes a chair or a freezing child, the chair has had a good life. You set several pieces of scrap timber aside. Not yet, but ready. Night comes early beneath the storm. The window covering is closed. The door is checked. The hearth is prepared. The family eats a hot meal. Then the fire is banked with almost ceremonial care. You use one of the best remaining pieces of wood, heavy, dry, dense. It catches slowly above the coal bed. You reduce the airflow, then you wait. The flame settles. Good. You sit near it with the others. Nobody speaks much. The children sense the mood. Even the youngest understand that something is different. They have been told not to waste wood. They have watched adults count the logs. They have seen the storm. One child asks whether the fire will last until morning. You answer that it will. Perhaps you believe this, perhaps you simply understand that fear creates no additional heat. The hours move slowly, the storm does not weaken. Eventually, everyone lies down. You remain awake a little longer. The hearth gives enough light to see the rough shape of the room. There is the table, the hanging coats, the tools, the shelves, the beds, ordinary possessions. In summer, they are merely household objects. Tonight, you look at some of them differently. That old wooden box could burn, so could part of the table, so could the chair. You hope it will not come to that. Then you sleep. When you wake, the room is painfully cold. The fire has nearly disappeared. You move quickly. At the hearth you uncover the coals. There are fewer than you hoped. You add kindling. Wait. A tiny flame appears. You feed it carefully. Then comes the difficult decision. Another large log. You have very few left, but saving firewood while the family freezes would be absurd. The log goes on. Flames rise. The cabin slowly recovers. You remain beside the hearth, watching the fire and listening to the wind. Morning must be close, you hope. Without a clock, the final hours of darkness can feel endless. The body becomes aware of time in strange ways. You judge it by fatigue, by the fire, by how long ago someone last woke, by a faint change in the darkness near the window. Eventually, grey light appears. The storm continues. You open the door only enough to look outside. Snow has piled high against the cabin. The woodpile is partly buried. You will have to reach it. You dress carefully. Wool, coat, mittens, hat, everything dry. A rope can be useful in terrible visibility, tied between secure points or used to help maintain a known route. The idea of needing guidance only a few steps from home may sound excessive. In blowing snow, it is not. You step outside. The cold takes your breath. Wind-driven snow strikes your face like sand. You keep the cabin close. You dig toward the remaining wood. One piece, another, another. Your arms fill, then you return. The door opens. For a moment, snow explodes into the room around you. Someone closes it immediately. You drop the wood beside the hearth. It is not much, but it is enough for several more hours. That phrase has become the household prayer. Several more hours. The storm can last longer than your confidence, longer than your fuel, longer than your strength. So you stop thinking about the entire winter. You think about the next fire, then the next meal, then the next night. This is how frightening situations become manageable, not by pretending they are harmless, by making the future smaller. By late afternoon, the wind finally changes. Nobody celebrates yet. You have learned better. But the snow against the window is no longer moving sideways. The roar around the roof softens. Then slowly the storm begins to pass. The silence afterward feels enormous. You open the door. A transformed world waits outside. Snow lies in deep sculpted drifts. The sky has cleared enough to reveal a pale strip of evening light. The woodpile is almost gone, but the forest, where one exists within reach, still holds fuel. Once travel becomes safe, there will be more cutting, more hauling, more splitting. Hard winter work that should ideally have been completed months ago. But necessity has never cared much about ideal timing. Tonight, however, the family is alive. The cabin stands, the fire burns, and the old chair remains a chair. You look at it with surprising affection. The storm has taught you something. A frontier family's real reserve is not simply the wood stacked outside. It is the willingness to change, to use less, to gather closer, to move beds, to simplify meals, to burn possessions if necessary, to abandon comfort before abandoning survival. The difference between hardship and disaster can be remarkably small. A few dry logs, a working chimney, a repaired wall, a blanket. A decision made before conditions become desperate, and yet there is one possibility more frightening than an empty woodpile. Because wood can sometimes be replaced. Furniture can be burned. People can gather beneath quilts. But every one of these plans depends upon a living ember at the center of the cabin. If that ember disappears on the coldest night of winter, the family faces an entirely different problem. Let us cross into a darker hour now, when the storm has passed, but the temperature continues falling. And sometime in the sleeping cabin, unnoticed by everyone, The last red coal turns black. Let us cross into a darker hour now, when the storm has passed but the temperature continues falling, and sometime in the sleeping cabin, unnoticed by everyone, the last red coal turns black. You wake because someone is shivering. At first, the sound slips into your dream, a faint rhythmic trembling. Then you open your eyes. The cabin is dark, completely dark. That is wrong. Even during the deepest hours of night, the hearth usually gives something. A red glow, a thin orange line beneath a log. A few sparks when the wind pulls through the chimney. Tonight there is nothing. You remain beneath the blankets for a moment, listening. The child across the room shivers again. You lift your head. Your breath appears immediately. A pale cloud hangs above the bed. The air hurts your nose. And before your bare feet even touch the floor, you understand what has happened. The fire is dead, not low. Not sleeping beneath a generous bed of ash. Dead. You pull on clothing quickly. There is no point dressing elegantly. Shirt, trousers, stockings, boots, coat. Your fingers are already clumsy. The floor feels viciously cold beneath you as you cross the cabin. At the hearth, you kneel and reach for the poker. You disturb the ash. Grey powder shifts. Nothing glows beneath it. You dig deeper. Still nothing. Perhaps there is one coal hiding near the back. You search. Nothing. The last ember has gone out. For a frontier household, this is more serious than an inconvenience. Fire is not merely something pleasant that can be recreated with the turn of a switch. Even in an era when manufactured matches are increasingly available, fire starting supplies must be kept dry and ready. In more isolated households, older methods and carefully preserved tinder may still matter. Whatever method your family uses, you need flame now. And the cabin is getting colder, you turn toward the beds. Everyone must wake. There will be complaints. Ignore them. Children are wrapped in blankets before they leave their bedding. The smallest remain together. Dry clothing goes on. Mittens if necessary. Hats if the room has become cold enough. Nobody stands around barefoot. Nobody sits beside the dead fireplace waiting for someone else to solve the problem. The household has entered a different kind of night. Preparation now becomes action. Your first advantage is that the fire-starting materials have been stored properly. Dry tinder waits in a protected place. Kindling has been brought indoors. This is exactly why yesterday's tired version of you prepared for tomorrow. You take the finest dry material first, perhaps thin shavings, perhaps bark, perhaps carefully prepared tinder. Above it, you arrange tiny pieces of wood, then slightly larger pieces. You do not place a heavy log on top. Not yet. A newborn flame is fragile. It must be fed gradually. Your hands shake slightly as you work. Partly from cold, partly from urgency. You strike the match if matches are available. A tiny yellow flame appears. For one beautiful moment, it seems enormous. You bring it to the tinder. The flame touches, catches, then disappears. Smoke curls upward. Nothing else. You try again. This time the tinder catches along one edge. You lean closer. Too close, perhaps. You protect the flame from any stray draft. A thin tongue of orange moves into the dry fibers. Then another. You add a sliver of wood. The flame grows. Someone behind you asks whether the fire is working. You do not answer yet. You have learned not to celebrate a fire until the wood itself begins burning. Another piece, then another. The tiny flame becomes several flames. A stick cracks there. That sound. Few noises are more comforting tonight. You add slightly larger kindling. The fire strengthens. Only then does the room begin to feel less desperate. But rebuilding the hearth is only part of the problem. The cabin has already lost much of its stored warmth. Walls that were merely cool earlier are now deeply chilled. The floor is cold. The bedding is cooling. Every object in the room seems to be absorbing heat from the new fire. It will take time, so you make the space around the family smaller. Blankets are hung or arranged to reduce the volume that needs immediate warming. Everyone gathers close enough to benefit from the hearth without creating a fire hazard. Children remain wrapped. The adults take the outer positions. You are not trying to restore comfort yet. You are protecting body heat. That distinction matters. If someone has become severely chilled, rough or careless warming is not the answer. Frontier understanding of cold injury varied greatly, and not every historical treatment was safe by modern standards. Families worked with the knowledge available to them, observation, experience, and whatever medical advice had reached their community. But they knew one essential fact very well. A person who becomes too cold can die. So they watched one another. Shivering is obvious. Confusion is more frightening. A person who becomes strangely quiet, clumsy, or difficult to wake demands attention. The youngest children and older family members receive particular care. Tonight, fortunately, everyone is awake. Everyone is responding. Everyone is cold, but the fire is growing. You place the first medium piece of wood over the kindling. Flames crawl along its split surface. Then you add another. The chimney begins drawing properly. Warm air rises. The orange light returns to the walls. You hear someone exhale with relief. Still, you do not relax. A fire that has gone out once can go out again. The wood must catch fully. The airflow must be right. And now you notice another problem. There is less fuel beside the hearth than you expected. The recent storm has already reduced your stores. Several pieces remain. Enough for the moment, perhaps not enough for another night like this. That problem belongs to daylight. Right now, you need heat. A frontier emergency has a way of simplifying priorities. You stop worrying about preserving appearances. You stop worrying about minor possessions. If ordinary firewood becomes unavailable and the cold becomes life-threatening, combustible household material can become fuel. A broken stool, a packing crate, scrap timber, wood that had been saved for repairs. In a true crisis, usefulness changes. A table is valuable because you can eat on it. But if the choice becomes table or warmth, the table has another use. Tonight you are not there yet, but you know where the axe is. The fire strengthens. Someone begins heating water. This accomplishes several things at once. It gives the family something warm to drink. It adds a little comfort, and the familiar sound of a pot near the hearth makes the emergency feel less frightening. Normal routines are returning. That matters more than it seems. Fear can make people careless. A frightened person rushes. A rushed person forgets. Perhaps the door is left open. Perhaps wet wood is thrown onto a weak flame. Perhaps someone carries an unprotected ember too close to bedding. So the household works deliberately fast enough to matter, slow enough to think. Outside, the temperature continues falling. The storm clouds have moved away, leaving a clear sky. The same clear sky that looks so beautiful through daylight can accompany brutal nighttime cold. The snow outside lies still now. No wind-driven curtain, no roaring storm, only silence. The danger has become quieter. This is sometimes worse. A storm announces itself. Deep cold can simply wait. You look toward the door. There may be another source of fire nearby. A neighbor. In some settled areas, households live close enough that one family can seek help from another. Historically, borrowing live coals or fire from a neighboring hearth is an old practice in many communities. But distance changes everything. If the nearest cabin is far away, traveling there in extreme cold during darkness may create a greater danger than remaining inside. So you stay. The new fire is working. No reason to exchange a controlled problem for an unknown one. The children are sitting together beneath quilts. One begins talking. That is a good sign. Another asks for food. An even better sign. You warm something simple. The meal does not need to be elaborate, warm liquid, bread, porridge, anything practical and available. The adults eat too. Maintaining body warmth requires energy, and winter work has already demanded plenty of it. Gradually, the cabin changes. First, you stop seeing quite so much of your breath. Then fingers begin to feel more comfortable. A child removes a blanket from around the head. Someone makes a joke about how terrible everyone looks. Nobody laughs very much. But someone does. The crisis is passing. You look at the hearth. Less than an hour ago, it contained nothing but cold ash. Now flames are wrapped around a thick piece of wood. The stones surrounding the fireplace are beginning to warm again. Soon they will store some of that heat. The cabin is rebuilding its little reserve, and you understand why preparation mattered. Not one dramatic invention, Not one secret survival technique. Dry tinder mattered, kindling mattered, blankets mattered, clothing mattered. Having fuel indoors mattered. Knowing where everything was in darkness mattered. Recognizing the problem early mattered. The family did not survive because someone suddenly became heroic. They survived because ordinary things had been placed where they were needed before the emergency began. By the time the first suggestion of dawn appears, the cabin is still cold but safe. The children return to their bedding. An adult remains awake near the hearth. Nobody trusts the fire enough to leave it alone yet. You sit beside it, watching orange light move across your hands. The night has given you a warning. A dead fire can be restarted, but what happens when it cannot? What happens when the tinder is damp, when the wood is gone, when someone is already dangerously cold, when the cabin itself can no longer be kept warm? The frontier family has one final defense, not the fireplace, not the walls, not even the woodpile. The last source of warmth is the family itself. And as we move into the coldest part of this long winter journey, the circle around the hearth becomes smaller still. The last source of warmth is the family itself. And as we move into the coldest part of this long winter journey, the circle around the hearth becomes smaller still. Imagine now that the fire does not return so easily. The tinder catches for a moment, then it dies. You try again. A flame appears, touches the kindling, and disappears into a thin thread of smoke. The wood is colder than you expected. Perhaps some of it has taken on moisture. Perhaps the chimney is drawing poorly. Perhaps you simply have the terrible luck of facing several small problems at once. The cabin continues cooling, so the family changes its strategy. You stop trying to heat the house. For now, the house is too large. Instead, you heat people. Everyone gathers in the smallest practical space near the hearth. Heavy blankets are hung to reduce drafts and create a crude enclosure. Bedding is moved closer. The thickest quilts come down from the beds. The youngest children go into the middle. Adults settle around them. Bodies touch. Shoulders press together, feet disappear beneath layers of wool. It is crowded. It is uncomfortable. It is also warmer. A human body constantly produces heat. Most of that heat is normally lost into the surrounding environment. In a cold cabin, the loss becomes faster, but several people wrapped together beneath insulating layers can reduce how quickly their warmth escapes. The family becomes a small living furnace, not a powerful one, not enough to make the room comfortable, but enough to matter. You pull one child against your chest. The child's hands are cold. You place them beneath the blankets, away from exposed air. Another adult checks the smallest child. Is the child awake, responsive, still shivering? These observations matter. Cold is dangerous partly because its progression can become deceptive. At first, the body fights loudly. Teeth chatter, muscles shake, hands hurt, feet sting, the person complains. Strangely, the more frightening stage can arrive when some of that struggle begins to disappear. A severely chilled person may become confused or unusually sleepy. Movement becomes clumsy. Speech may change. Judgment weakens. Frontier families did not possess modern emergency medicine, and historical treatments for cold injury were not always correct. But experience taught people to fear unusual sleepiness and confusion in someone who had been exposed to severe cold. So tonight, nobody simply tells a dangerously chilled child to go back to sleep. You watch. You listen. You keep the child protected. Dryness becomes critical. A wet garment can steal warmth quickly. Snow carried indoors melts. Sweat dampens clothing. Boots become wet. Mittens become wet. And so damp outer layers are removed when dry replacements exist. Dry wool goes on. Dry blankets come out. The family protects its limited warmth from moisture as carefully as it protects the fire from bad fuel. Then there is food. If the person is awake and able to eat or drink safely, something warm can bring comfort and needed energy. A pot is placed near whatever heat remains. Perhaps there is broth, perhaps warm milk, perhaps thin porridge, perhaps simply heated water with whatever the household can spare. You hold the cup between your hands before drinking. The warmth enters your fingers first. Steam touches your face. You take a careful sip. It is remarkable how luxurious a plain, warm drink can become when the room around you is freezing. The children receive theirs. Nobody complains about the menu. Cold is an excellent cure for fussiness. You keep working on the fire. Tiny fuel first. Dry shavings, splinters, then sticks. Patience is difficult when you are frightened, but impatience can smother the flame, so you resist the urge to pile everything on at once. A weak flame needs air, space, dry material. Time. Finally, the kindling catches, not dramatically. There is no sudden wall of flame, just a small orange tongue that remains where the others disappeared. Then another. You wait. The family watches from beneath the blankets. Nobody speaks. A stick blackens, its edge glows. Then the flame climbs. Now you add another piece. The fire survives. Relief moves through the room almost physically, but the experience has shown you something important. There must be another plan. If the hearth fails completely, the family cannot depend upon one source of heat. Some frontier households have a stove, others may have another hearth or a smaller heating arrangement elsewhere in the home. But such equipment varies enormously according to region, wealth, period, and access to manufactured goods. There is no magical backup system waiting in every frontier cabin. Sometimes the backup is simply more primitive. A heated brick, a warming stone. Extra blankets, a smaller enclosed space, another household nearby, or the warmth of other people, and sometimes survival means leaving. This is the decision nobody wants to make. A cabin is protection. Leaving it during extreme cold can be more dangerous than remaining inside. But if the structure burns, becomes badly damaged, or can no longer shelter the family, staying may become impossible, so people know their neighbors. That relationship is another kind of insulation. Not moss between logs, human beings between one family and disaster. In settled frontier communities, neighbors may help with fuel, food, shelter, animals, illness, childbirth, repairs. A family that attempts to remain completely independent can discover very quickly that winter is stronger than pride. Perhaps another cabin stands within walking distance. In good weather, the journey is easy. Tonight, it could be dangerous. You would not leave without thought. You would dress carefully, keep people together, know the route, avoid exposing children longer than necessary, and if visibility were poor, you might decide that remaining in your own shelter is safer. There is no universal rule, only judgment. That is what so much of frontier survival comes down to. Judgment made with imperfect information. The sky does not tell you exactly how cold it will become. The woodpile does not tell you how many days it must last. The child cannot always explain how cold they really feel. The fire does not promise to remain alive. You observe, you remember, you decide, and then you live with the decision. The hearth is stronger now. A larger piece of wood catches. Orange light returns to the cabin. The blankets hanging around the family's smaller space begin trapping some of the warmth. You do not remove them yet. Why heat the unused corners? Tonight the family remains close. The children settle together, adults sit on either side, someone tells a story, not because storytelling produces measurable heat, because the night is long. Perhaps it is a story brought from another country. Perhaps one carried west from Pennsylvania, Virginia, Kentucky, New York, or farther away. Perhaps it is about a grandmother who survived a winter worse than this one. Every generation seems to know someone who endured weather far more terrible than whatever is happening now. The details improve with age. The snow becomes deeper. The temperature becomes colder. The wolves become larger. Grandmother becomes increasingly unimpressed by all of it. The children listen. Outside, the frozen landscape remains silent. Inside, someone laughs. This is another form of survival rarely listed in manuals, keeping fear from filling the room. People sing, pray, tell stories, play simple games, tease one another, remember warmer seasons, talk about planting, talk about spring. They imagine mud, imagine rain, imagine the smell of thawing earth. After enough weeks of snow, even mud begins to sound beautiful. The hours pass. You check the fire still burning. You check the children, warm enough. You check the door, closed. You check the remaining wood, not much, but enough. That word again, enough. Frontier life rarely offers abundance when you most want it. Instead, it teaches the strange comfort of enough. enough food until morning, enough wood for the night, enough blankets for the children, enough strength for one more chore, enough flame to restart the hearth, enough people gathered beneath one quilt to keep the smallest among them warm. Eventually, the eastern sky begins to pale. You notice it through a narrow gap near the window covering. Morning. The fire has survived, so has everyone else. The emergency has ended without becoming a tragedy. There will be work today. More fuel must be found, wet material dried, the hearth inspected, perhaps a neighbor visited, perhaps repairs made. The family will discuss what went wrong. They will change something, move the tinder, store more kindling indoors, bring an extra armful of wood before bed. Winter teaches through consequences. A lesson ignored once may return with sharper teeth. You look around at the family. They are tired, hair tangled, clothing wrinkled, faces pale in the morning light. Nothing about the scene resembles the heroic frontier paintings that future generations may admire. There is no grand pose, no untouched wilderness glowing behind a confident pioneer. There are only ordinary people beneath rumpled blankets, and perhaps that is closer to the truth. Survival is rarely a single act of courage. It is attention, cooperation, dry socks, stored wood, a repaired crack, a warm meal, a hand checking whether a child is still shivering, a person waking in darkness because the room feels wrong, a neighbor close enough to help, a family willing to crowd together when pride and privacy become less important than warmth. The last defense against cold is not a clever machine, it is care. And by morning, as the first pale light spreads across the snow, that care has carried the household through another night. Now we drift onward toward the final days of winter, when surviving the cold is no longer only about one dangerous night. It is about waking tomorrow and doing everything again. Now we drift onward toward the final days of winter, when surviving the cold is no longer only about one dangerous night. It is about waking tomorrow and doing everything again. Morning arrives quietly. No storm, no screaming wind, no emergency at the hearth, only the familiar grey light of a frontier winter entering through the covered window. For a moment, you remain beneath the blankets. The cabin is cold, but not dangerously so. The fire survived. Someone has already risen to feed it, and you can hear the soft crackle of kindling catching beyond the bed. After everything that has happened, this ordinary sound feels almost luxurious. You open your eyes. The children are still sleeping. A wall stocking hangs near the hearth. Boots wait beside the wall. A pot sits ready for breakfast. Nothing is wrong. And this, perhaps, is what most frontier mornings actually look like. Not disaster, not heroism. Work. You dress beneath the blankets as much as possible before finally surrendering to the cold air. Your clothes are stiff. Your boots are colder than you would prefer. You pull on wool, fasten what needs fastening, and move toward the hearth. There is coffee if the household can afford and obtain it. Perhaps there is tea. Perhaps neither. There may simply be hot water, milk, or a warm breakfast of grain. Whatever the meal, it is eaten with the understanding that daylight is valuable. There is work outside, always. The first task is fuel. After the recent storms and long nights, the wood supply needs attention, so you take the axe. The handle is smooth in familiar places where hands have worn the wood. Outside, the cold is sharp but manageable. The sky has cleared. Snow covers everything. The cabin roof wears a thick white cap. Smoke rises almost vertically from the chimney. There is little wind. You stand for a moment and listen. Winter silence is not truly silent. Snow compresses beneath your boots. A branch cracks somewhere in the distance. An animal moves. The chimney murmurs behind you. But compared with the storm, the world feels asleep. You begin working. Cutting firewood in winter is miserable labor. The axe is cold. Your muscles are cold. The tree is frozen. Snow complicates movement. Every piece must eventually be hauled, split, stacked, and kept dry enough to burn. Ideally, much of this work was completed during warmer months. The wise household entered winter with more fuel than seemed necessary. But even careful plans can fail. A winter can last longer. Temperatures can fall lower. A family can become larger. Illness can reduce the number of people able to work. Fuel that looked abundant in autumn can look frighteningly small by late winter, so you cut. The axe rises, falls, a pale chip jumps from the wood again and again. Soon your body begins producing enough heat that the cold feels less severe. This is one of winter's little tricks. Stand still and you freeze. Work hard and you sweat. Sweat too much, and damp clothing can chill you later. So even labor requires judgment. You open your coat slightly, slow your pace, avoid becoming soaked beneath your wool. There is no benefit in winning an argument with a tree only to become dangerously cold afterward. Eventually the wood gives way. Then comes splitting, then carrying. A child old enough to help may collect smaller pieces. Another can gather kindling. Work is divided according to strength. Frontier childhood is filled with chores because a household has too much to do for capable hands to remain idle. Children carry water, gather fuel, feed animals, help with food, watch younger siblings, sweep, mend, fetch, learn. Their contribution may seem small beside an adult swinging an axe, but winter survival is built from small contributions. One armful at a time, the pile beside the cabin begins growing again. Not enough for the rest of the season. Enough for now. There is that word again. Enough. By midday, you return indoors. The change in temperature feels wonderful. Your cheeks burn as they warm. Snow melts from your boots. The smell of the cabin surrounds you. Wood smoke. Food, wool, leather, damp timber, human beings living too close together for too many months. No perfume maker will ever bottle it, probably for the best. Your mittens are placed where they can dry, not directly against the flames. Nothing valuable is placed carelessly near the fire. A household that depends upon flame also spends much of its life trying not to burn down. This tension never disappears. Fire is friend and threat. You feed it, protect it, watch it, fear it. The chimney requires attention too. Wood smoke leaves deposits. A dirty chimney can become dangerous. Sparks can escape. Creosote can ignite. So maintenance matters. The exact methods vary from household to household, but people understand that smoke needs a clear route out of the home. The hearth is cleaned, ash is managed, and even ash is not necessarily useless. In older domestic life, wood ash can have uses beyond the fireplace. It may become part of soap-making processes or other household work, depending on local practice. The frontier household wastes surprisingly little because nearly everything has required labor to obtain. A broken cloth can become a rag can become tinder, animal fat can become useful in cooking or lighting. Bones may contribute to broth or other household purposes. Leather is repaired, buttons are saved, nails are straightened and reused when practical. Wood scraps become kindling. Even yesterday's warmth survives beneath today's ash if the fire has been managed well. This habit of reuse is not romantic environmental wisdom. It is necessity. Stores are distant, money may be scarce, roads may be poor, winter may make travel impossible. If something breaks in the middle of a storm, there is no guarantee that a replacement can be purchased tomorrow, so you repair. Again and again. A coat may carry patches over older patches. A quilt may contain pieces of dresses that no longer exist. A child's garment may once have belonged to an older sibling. A wooden handle may have been replaced by hand. The cabin is filled with objects that have refused to die because the family cannot afford to let them. In the afternoon, attention turns to food. Winter survival is a story of heat, but heat depends upon calories. The body needs fuel just as the hearth does. Much of the family's winter food has been prepared long before the snow arrived. Vegetables may have been stored in suitable conditions. Meat may have been salted, smoked, dried, or otherwise preserved according to the household's means and traditions. Grain waits in sacks or bins. Beans keep well. Root vegetables can be valuable. Apples, where stored successfully, offer a reminder that food can still taste of another season. The exact pantry differs from one frontier region to another. A household in Montana does not eat precisely like one in Kentucky. A family with cattle has different resources from a poor homesteading household. Access to a town changes everything. So does ancestry. German-speaking settlers bring some food traditions. Scandinavian families bring others. People whose parents came through New England, Appalachia, the South Canada, or older settlements farther east carry their own habits westward. The frontier is not one culture, it is many cultures learning to endure the same weather. And on a cold afternoon, all those traditions eventually face the same practical question. What can we put in the pot? A stew is useful. It stretches ingredients. It warms the room while cooking. It turns tough pieces of food into something easier to eat. It can remain near the fire while other work continues. The smell fills the cabin by evening. Everyone knows supper is coming long before anyone sees the bowl. That smell is part of winter survival too. Not physically, perhaps, but emotionally. Months of cold can make the world feel reduced to chores and darkness. A warm meal divides the day, morning work, midday work, supper. Then the long night. These routines give shape to time. Without them, winter might feel endless. And by late winter, people are counting. Not necessarily with numbers scratched onto a wall, they count signs. The sun remains above the horizon a little longer. Snow on a south-facing roof begins to soften during the warmest part of the day. Icicles drip, then freeze again. A bird appears that someone has not noticed for months. The light changes. You can feel it. Spring is not here. Not yet. A foolish traveler who treats one mild afternoon as the end of winter may receive a brutal correction by nightfall. But the season has begun to loosen its grip. The family notices. People talk about planting, repairs, travel, neighbors they have not visited, work that must begin once the ground thaws. Children talk about running outside without being wrapped in layers of wool. Someone mentions mud. Nobody even complains. After enough frozen months, mud sounds like freedom. That evening you bring in the night's wood, more than yesterday. The sight of the small renewed stack beside the hearth gives you comfort. The fire is prepared, the door is checked, the children settle beneath quilts. Everything happens as it has happened countless times, yet tonight it feels different. You understand the routine now. You know why the kindling waits in a dry place, why the door is closed quickly, why blankets cover the window, why the best logs are saved for the deepest part of night, why damp socks are treated as a problem, why children sleep close, why the fire is checked before everyone closes their eyes. None of these acts is impressive by itself. Together they have carried a family through winter. You lie down, the cabin becomes quiet. A log cracks in the hearth, wind brushes softly against the wall, and for the first time in many weeks, you hear something else. Water. Somewhere outside, snow is melting from the edge of the roof. One drop falls, then another, then another. The sound is tiny, but everyone who has endured a long winter knows what it means. The cold has not vanished. There may still be storms, there may still be freezing nights, but winter is becoming mortal. Soon the great white landscape will begin to change. And when it does, the family will step outside and discover what all those freezing nights have cost them and what, quietly, they have managed to preserve. Morning comes with the sound of dripping water. Not much. Just a slow tap from the edge of the roof. Then another. You lie beneath the quilts and listen. For months, the world outside has seemed frozen into permanence. Snow has covered the ground. Ice has sealed the water. Wind has polished the drifts until they shine beneath the pale winter sun. But now something is changing. You rise. The fire still needs attention. Spring has not arrived simply because the roof is dripping. You uncover the coals, add kindling, and place another piece of wood across the growing flame. The ritual remains. Perhaps that is appropriate. Winter does not usually end in a single dramatic moment. It retreats by inches. The days grow longer, the sun climbs higher. Snow softens in the afternoon and freezes again after sunset. Icicles shrink. Dark patches of earth appear beside buildings. Then another storm arrives and covers everything again. Winter reminds you that it has not quite finished. Still, the family knows the worst is passing. You open the door. Cold air enters, but it does not have the same teeth. Outside, sunlight lies across the snow. The brightness makes you squint. Water runs slowly beneath a crust of ice near the cabin wall. A child steps beside you and notices it too. Neither of you says much. There is no need. For people who have spent months protecting every scrap of warmth, The sound of melting snow is announcement enough. The household begins changing almost immediately, not relaxing, changing. Winter work becomes spring preparation. There are tools to inspect, fences to repair, animals to check carefully, seed to consider, mud to anticipate, and once the ground allows it, planting. The cabin itself carries scars from the season. A patch of chinking has cracked. One part of the roof needs attention. The door no longer sits exactly as it did in autumn. Smoke has darkened the wall above the hearth. Floorboards bear the marks of wet boots, ash, dragged wood, and months of crowded living. The house looks tired, so do you. That seems fair. You have spent an entire season keeping one another alive. Now comes the accounting. Not an accounting written neatly in a ledger, though some households certainly keep records. This is a different kind. How much food remains? How much wood? Which tools broke? Which clothes need repair? Did the animals survive in good condition? What must be replaced before another winter? And what did this winter teach you? You walk toward what remains of the woodpile. It is almost embarrassing now. A few pieces, some scraps, bark, kindling. Months ago, the pile seemed enormous. You remember standing beside it before the first serious snow, wondering whether you had prepared enough. Now you know the answer. Barely. Perhaps next autumn you will stack more. Everyone says this after a difficult winter. More wood next year. More food, better chinking. Repair the roof earlier, store extra tinder, keep another blanket. The lessons of cold weather become plans for warm weather. This is how practical knowledge grows, not through grand discoveries, through memory. A family survives something unpleasant and changes one habit. A neighbor sees what worked and copies it. A child grows up watching a parent bank the fire and later does the same in another home. Techniques move quietly across generations. Sometimes no one writes them down. They simply become the way things are done. You can imagine a child from this cabin many years from now, older, living somewhere else, perhaps in a better house, perhaps closer to a town, perhaps using a cast iron stove instead of the old hearth. On the first cold evening of autumn, that person will still check the fuel, still keep tinder dry, still notice drafts, still distrust a woodpile that looks merely adequate. And perhaps without thinking they will place tomorrow morning's kindling exactly where a parent once placed it in this cabin. That is one way history survives, not in monuments, in habits. By midday, the temperature rises enough for snow to begin sliding from part of the roof. It falls with a heavy rush. Everyone inside stops for a moment, then continues working. The children are fascinated by the exposed earth appearing along the sunny side of the cabin. It is brown, wet, ugly, wonderful. One of them pokes the mud with a stick. For months, the ground has been hard enough to resist almost everything. Now it yields. Soon, of course, everyone will be complaining about mud. Boots will sink into it. Wheels will struggle through it. Floors will become filthy. Clothing will acquire stains that seem impossible to remove. The frontier will exchange one inconvenience for another. This is apparently how seasons maintain their sense of humor, but mud does not freeze you in bed. So for now, it is welcome. As the thaw continues, neighbors begin appearing more often. Travel becomes possible again, though roads and trails may remain terrible. News arrives, stories are exchanged. Who lost livestock, whose roof failed, who ran short of food, who became ill, who had a child during the winter, who nearly burned down a cabin because somebody placed something foolishly close to the stove. Every household has a story. Some are funny now. They were not funny when they happened. Others remain quiet. Not every family comes through winter untouched. Illness, accidents, hunger, fire, exposure, and isolation are real dangers. Historical frontier life should not be softened into a comfortable tale in which preparation guarantees survival. It does not. People can do everything they know how to do and still suffer terrible losses. Weather can overwhelm preparation. Illness can arrive at the worst possible moment. A failed harvest can weaken a household before the first snow even falls. Poverty limits choices. Distance limits help. Luck matters. That truth makes the ordinary survival of a family more meaningful, not less. You were never invincible. You were prepared enough, skilled enough, supported enough, and fortunate enough. That is different. One afternoon, you walk farther from the cabin than you have for months. Snow remains in shaded places, but patches of exposed ground spread across the landscape. The air smells different. Wet soil, bark, old grass, water. The scent is almost overwhelming after so long in a world of smoke, wool, snow, and frozen timber. Behind you stands the cabin. In daylight, it looks smaller than you remember. This is the structure that seemed to contain your entire universe during the storms. Now, beneath an open sky, it is just a cabin again. Rough logs, a chimney, a roof needing repair, a door that never quite fit properly. You think about the freezing nights, the fire burning low, the stones beneath the blankets, the children packed together, the careful counting of logs, the storm that swallowed the horizon, the morning when the hearth went black. At the time, each event seemed enormous. Now they are memories. That transformation happens quietly. Danger becomes story, fear becomes advice, hardship becomes family knowledge. One day, someone may tell these stories beside another fire. The details may change. The winter may become colder with every retelling. The snow may become deeper. The woodpile may become smaller. Perhaps you will become much braver in the story than you actually felt at the time. This is one of the privileges of surviving. You get to edit your fear afterward, but beneath the exaggeration, the real lesson remains surprisingly modest. Frontier families survived freezing nights through layers. Layers of wood and mud between themselves and the wind. Layers of wool and quilts between their bodies and the air. Layers of preparation between an ordinary night and an emergency. And layers of people, family, neighbors, communities. Knowledge inherited from those who had already learned what cold could do. No single layer was perfect. That was never the point. The wall could crack, the fire could die, the blanket could become damp, the woodpile could run low. A person could become exhausted, but when one defense weakened, another might remain. That was the quiet architecture of survival, not strength alone. Redundancy, attention, adaptation, care. The sun begins dropping. Even now, evening brings cold. You return to the cabin before darkness. Inside, supper is waiting. The fire burns steadily. You remove your muddy boots. Someone complains about the dirt you have carried inside. This, oddly enough, feels wonderful. It is an ordinary complaint. The sort of complaint people make when they are no longer thinking every moment about survival. After eating, you prepare the hearth for another night. Of course you do. The season may be changing, but habit is stronger than optimism. You choose a good piece of wood, place it carefully, check the airflow, make sure tomorrow's kindling is dry. Then you inspect the door, still a draft near the bottom. You push cloth against it. Someone laughs. Surely it is not cold enough to worry about that anymore. Perhaps not. You do it anyway. Winter has trained you well. The children climb into bed. They still sleep close, although they no longer need quite so many layers. The heated stones remain near the hearth tonight. No one asks for them. Another sign. You settle beneath the quilts. The room darkens. Firelight moves slowly across the wall. Outside, water drips from the roof. You listen. Drop. Silence. Drop. Silence. A sound almost too small to notice. And yet it marks the end of our long winter journey. Because the remarkable thing about frontier survival is not that people discovered some forgotten secret capable of defeating cold. They did not. They remained vulnerable to it. They respected it. They prepared for it. They built walls from what they had. They burned what they could gather. They wore wool, shared beds, stored food, repaired cracks, watched the weather, checked the children, helped neighbors, and rose from warm blankets in the middle of the night when the fire needed another log. Again and again and again. That repetition is the part history often forgets. We remember dramatic blizzards. We remember extraordinary rescues. We remember famous expeditions and legendary winters. But most survival happens quietly. A mother wakes because the cabin feels colder. A father carries one more armful of wood before sunset. A child gathers kindling. A neighbor arrives with food. Someone repairs a wall before the storm. Someone keeps the fire alive until dawn. Small actions, ordinary people, long nights. And eventually spring. The fire beside you settles lower. This time you do not worry quite so much. Morning will come warmer than the one before. Beyond the cabin, snow is withdrawing from the land. Soon there will be grass. Then insects, then planting, then long summer evenings when it becomes almost impossible to remember exactly how winter cold felt. But you will remember enough. You will remember when autumn returns. You will look at the wood pile, and you will stack it higher. For now, though, there is nothing left to prepare. The cabin is quiet. The family is warm. The fire is alive. And outside, beneath the last thin crust of winter ice, water has begun moving again. So let the old frontier fade into darkness. Let the wind disappear beyond the timber walls. Let the hearth settle into its soft orange glow. And if you're listening somewhere warm tonight, beneath a roof that keeps out the weather, perhaps allow yourself one small moment of gratitude for the quiet machinery of modern comfort. Then close your eyes. The fire has been banked. There is enough wood until morning, and for tonight at least, no one needs to wait.